Many people are interested in hybrid Zoom meetings these days and wondering how to do it on a shoestring. And I'm going to report how our group has been doing it on a shoestring for about a year now, and it's worked pretty well. So I figured I'd kind of show people what we do in case it can be of any help. Before COVID, this group had meetings every week with only in-person attendance. I'm in the room now. We have a speaker come in quite often and speak in front of the room, and they need to be amplified in the room. We've got a projector screen at the front of the room, a projector, the place where the presenter stands, and the audience out in the room. We also have some speakers mounted on the ceiling. Those have been wired through the ceiling along this beam to come into a cart that we roll in, which just has a very old amp on it, and the wires plug into the back of the amp. The amp also has wireless microphones that come in off of these wireless connectors into the amp. And that was basically our setup before COVID came along. When COVID hit us, we stopped using it and we moved all of our operations onto Zoom. And that's the only way we met for quite a while, was over Zoom. And eventually we got back here, but we didn't want to lose our Zoom audience. We're basically an elderly group, and Zoom offered lots of advantages to lots of our members who either couldn't get in and perhaps by now even lived far away from this meeting site and still wanted to participate in the meetings. So we wanted to find a way to actually integrate Zoom. So now our presenters also need to be seen across Zoom. Likewise, audience members that are coming in on Zoom need to be seen and heard by the presenter here. But the presenter may not be here either. The presenter may be over Zoom, so we have to be quite flexible. And if there are people here in the room that want to ask questions of the presenter, those questioners in the room have to be seen by both the rest of the Zoom audience and by the speaker, whether the speaker is here or not. One of the first things we did, and which might not actually have been technically necessary, was to also wire the projector up to the back of the room with an HDMI cord along. But the main thing we did is we also put a laptop on our sound cart, and that HDMI cord that comes in through the ceiling now connects to the laptop through this J5 Create hub, which costs about $80. If you get a laptop that has the appropriate connectors, you may not need such a hub. This laptop costs about $1,000. We decided to get a MacBook Air, even though any model that runs Zoom and is capable of the appropriate graphics that are necessary to project it onto the screen should be just fine. Into this hub, we have the HDMI from the projector plugged in. Other port we have here, the cam link. This is actually to connect a room camera, which we use a very simple movie camera that has an HDMI connection. So we connect through the HDMI connection down through an HDMI cable, and then in through this cam link, which is a video processing, video capture device. It costs about $100. Now, the important part for us on the camera mostly is to have optical zoom and focus So that's why we use this camera, but you can actually find cameras with USB connections that also have this similar thing. So it's essentially that turns into essentially a very fancy webcam. And then a connector comes out of the audio port on the J5 Create and goes into the aux in on our soundboard. The aux out on the soundboard goes in directly into the laptop. I should mention that the cord that we use for the sound out that goes into the laptop is specifically made as a microphone cord so that the laptop knows that it's a microphone rather than headphones. So the important point here is you have to have sufficient connections on the laptop to have a connection that goes into an amplifying device, that comes from the amplifying device, that goes to your projector, and that could be wireless, and that goes from a room camera. And the final part of our setup is we are currently using this microphone stand. Earlier we had just used a regular microphone stand and then put a separate tripod next to it. But the point is that there is an iPhone that sits to look at the person at the microphone. So this is for the people asking questions in the room so that they will be able to see the speaker up in the front of the room. So the only important part of the phone really right here is number one, that it attaches to Zoom, and number two, that it has a camera. The sound is not important. The most important part of setting up a hybrid system is that all of the sound in the room has to go through one node or computer. In our case, that's our laptop here. So if there are any other laptops or phones in the room, they have to be both muted, that is, their microphone has to be muted, and the speaker turned off. So on a completely separate laptop, which we'll use to host the meeting, we will start up the Zoom meeting, and then on the laptop on the soundboard, we log into the meeting. This laptop on the soundboard is the only one that will process audio. So the mute definitely has to be off. And we want to make sure that it's only getting sound from the audio board. So one way to do that is to click the audio settings here and ensure that if we make a loud noise in front of the laptop, it's not using the laptop's microphone. And if we do audio through a microphone, through the soundboard, then it does show up on the screen. So that demonstrates that the sound is only coming in through the sound system, which has to be the case, otherwise you're going to get terrible feedback in the room. And test the speaker. It gets played through the speakers in the ceiling. So far, this video has described how we set up our hybrid system. This section is to describe why and what the problems are with setting up a hybrid system. Here, we have a box representing a Zoom node like a laptop. It has a microphone and a speaker, basically, and it runs Zoom and is connected to the internet. The basic functions are when you speak into the microphone, it goes to the internet. The sound coming in from the internet from other people go to your speaker. I am just talking about the audio portion here, not the video portion. That seems fairly simple. Is there also, when you speak into the microphone, does it come out of your own speaker? For right now, we'll leave that as a question mark, but you can see how that could create problems. That is, if you say something, it goes into your speaker, some of that sound goes back into the microphone. That can create a feedback loop, which creates a squeal sound. We'll get to that. So this is what one node looks like. So normally we deal with more than one node, of course, in Zoom. So let's consider when we have two nodes. They're both connected the same way, and they're connected over an internet that's going to take some amount of time, not very much, could be just like 1/10 of a second to communicate between nodes. So let's say I say hi into my microphone, and that hi goes into the internet, and 0.1 seconds later, it gets to the other node and it comes out of their speaker. So they hear my hi after a delay. Let's say for a moment that some of that hi that comes out of their speaker goes back into their microphone. And that then would be sent across the internet again, creating another delay, and would then come out of my speaker again after 2 delays. So I said hi, and after about 0.2 seconds or so, I hear hi come out of my speaker, my own hi. It sounds like an echo of what I've just said. And then if it went back into my microphone, then it could be transmitted again, and this could repeat over and over again, creating an echo. Now, obviously, that doesn't happen in most cases. So why doesn't it? Well, because Zoom has feedback cancellation. That is, whenever the sound coming in the microphone is exactly the same as the sound it's putting out on its speaker, it doesn't allow that sound to get to the internet. So it's constantly matching the sounds that are coming in from the microphone with what it's putting out on the speaker, and it's canceling anything from the microphone that's exactly the same as what the speaker is producing. So now let's see what our little example looks like. I say hi. It goes up to the internet and appears here 1/10 of a second later and comes out the speaker after that delay. And then let's say some of that hi gets back into their microphone. But here, it instantly notices that the hi that's going into the microphone is the hi that the speaker is producing. So it cancels that hi, and it doesn't go back into the internet, and it doesn't come back to my speaker, and there is no echo. The only thing that's happened is that I've said hi over here, and this person hears the hi after a very short delay. They don't even know it's delayed because they don't have a reference of what it's delayed from. If you try making music together, you will notice a delay. In that case, I might play a note, and they'll get the note 1/10 of a second later and think that they're singing along with it, but then they'll sing their note as soon as they hear mine, and their note will get to me maybe 0.2 seconds after I sang my note. They'll start singing their note. So even this arrangement doesn't work perfectly, but it works most of the time. So this is considering the case where there's a wall or a distance between the nodes. Suppose we took the wall and the distance out. In this case, I'm going to say hi on the right side just because it simplifies the diagram.
So I say hi, it goes into the microphone, and it goes across to the other node, and it comes out of its speaker. Of course, any of that hi that goes into its own microphone will be canceled. We've already discussed that. But what about the hi that comes out of its speaker and goes back into my microphone? You will notice there is no cancellation in this cycle here. So my hi will be delayed by 0.1 seconds. It'll come out of this other speaker, which will immediately go back into my microphone and be transmitted again repeatedly, and you'll get an endless echo. Many people have experienced this accidentally with their Zoom connections when they opened two different Zoom connections in the same room. So, what is the lesson? Never have two Zoom nodes that are close enough that one of the microphones can hear the other one's speaker. Well, that's pretty tough if you're trying to create a room full of people that are all trying to interact with Zoom. They all therefore have to interact with one node, and that's exactly what our setup is doing. So the room node here is the node that we have on our sound card. That is the laptop. So we have an amp, and basically anything that comes out through the headphone port, which goes into the amp and goes to all the room speakers. Anything that comes in through the microphones goes through the amp and through the aux out into the microphone port. So this is the only node that processes sound in the entire room. The part of this down here, the amp with the room mics and the room speakers, we were using before we ever installed Zoom. That part remains pretty much unchanged. But now we have the Zoom connections, and we can hear and see the other people coming in off of Zoom, and they can hear us. So how do we put it all together? I've already shown you the room node on our sound card. Together with the amp, it handles all the room audio. Together with the camera and projector, it also handles the primary room video. You can actually set up other Zoom nodes in the room that process video as well. That is, they can each have their own camera, they can each have their own screen, they don't interfere with each other. It doesn't matter, as long as they keep all of their audio down. That is, the speaker off and the microphone muted. Now, that room node that sits on the cart requires very little active intervention during the meeting. That is, we may have to operate the camera if the speaker likes to move around a lot, but if there's no speaker, or if the speaker just stays in one place, we just set the camera and we can pretty much forget it. The sound levels have to be set so that the room can hear the sound correctly, and so can the people across Zoom. But once they're set, they can often just be left there. And then if the screen has to be set to either a speaker or gallery view, then that can be set. So all these things can pretty much be set once and then forgotten. The audience node, which we showed on the microphone stand, that also can just be set up. On the camera on the phone is turned on, the phone is logged into Zoom, and then it just sits there. And if somebody comes up and asks a question, then it goes in through the microphone, the camera takes their picture, and it's up to the host to determine whether or not that should be put onto the screen or sent out over Zoom. The host node, which we showed very briefly, is the place where the meeting is started. So the host starts the meeting. They admit the people from the audience if the settings require that. They monitor the audience to make sure that people are muted, etc., as needed. One of their most important jobs is to control Zoom highlighting. So the host will usually just have the camera, the room camera on the screen, which will be taking a picture of the speaker who's in the room. But it could also be a speaker who's not in the room, for example, one that's at home. And when it comes time for Q&A, it's often important to put either the MC or the speaker or the person asking the question or all three onto the screen. So the host basically is controlling which windows everyone is seeing on their screen if those people are in speaker view. By the way, the host here can be at home. The host does not have to be in the room. The nice thing about having the host in the room is that, first of all, somebody has to be in the room to set up the room node and the audience node. And second of all, the host, in addition to doing these other things, can both do the setup and can often monitor these things and make whatever little changes need to be made. So, in other words, one person can often handle the job of setting up and manipulating the room node, making sure that the audience node is correct, and doing all the stuff listed here for host node. One person can often do all of that if that person is in the room. But if they're home, then obviously someone else has to come in and set this other stuff up. There can optionally be a co-host, and that person can also be local or remote. It doesn't really matter. That person, all they mostly do is they help the host with admitting people into the room and monitoring the crowds to make sure they're muted properly, etc., or unmuted. And they can also help put highlight the various windows if the host has problems keeping up. The co-host, also a nice thing for them to do is to record the meeting. One of the issues with Zoom is that if you record something to the cloud, if you record the meeting to the cloud, then it does not properly record just the highlighted windows. It has sort of a bug in it where it will, once you highlight more than one window, it improperly figures out which windows should be on the recording. So the only way to make it do it correctly is to record it to your local machine. So we often have the co-host do that task. So at the beginning of the meeting, the co-host starts up a recording onto their own machine. It is possible that the host could do that. Then there's the presenter. So if the presenter is presenting from home, obviously they have to have their own laptop. That's all that this is saying. If they're presenting there in the room and sharing slides, then they also need a laptop. We are often happy to have the presenters bring their own laptop in and just present from their own laptop. It works just fine. Sometime we'll provide the laptop. But the other case is where the presenter doesn't need to present slides at all. They just want to stand up in front of the crowd and speak. In that case, there doesn't need to be a node at all. That is, we already have a camera on the speaker. They already have a microphone. And so they don't need a separate node. By the way, we should also note that if the presenter is not in the room and is presenting remotely, then there's really no reason to have a video camera in the room. It's not doing anything. Finally, we run our meetings with an MC, Master of Ceremonies. That is probably the most important person in the meeting as far as the crowd is concerned. The MC can be present in the room or not. They can be at home, and they often are. The MC is the person who opens up the meeting. They are the on-screen representative of the meeting. So they open up the meeting, they introduce the presenter. At the end of the meeting, they handle the questions and answers, and I'll get into that in a minute. Then they'll do the announcements, they'll adjourn the meeting, etc. So if they're at home, obviously they're just on a laptop the same way everyone else is, or on their desktop. If they're in the meeting, it is certainly most natural to have them up in front of the room. So they're sitting up there with a laptop of some kind, but you don't want them looking into the screen of the laptop the whole time, or for the laptop camera, that's the built-in laptop camera, to be their primary camera. If that was the case, if they were looking up at the crowd, it would always be looking up at their face. If they're looking down at the screen, then the audience isn't seeing them. So what generally happens is the laptop is sort of below the eye level of the MC. It's much lower. And then we rig up a webcam on a USB line that is mounted at about eye level, that sits between the MC and the audience. And that way the MC can be looking out at the audience during their address. They can be looking directly at the speaker during their address, and their webcam will be seeing them at kind of eye level. A little bit about how we handle our questions and answers. Questions are fed to the MC using the chat function. And sometimes people can also use the raise hand function on Twitter. We don't use that so much. So basically, if someone has a question, they can put their name into chat, and that basically puts them in a queue to be called on by the MC. What about people who are in the room? They don't have a chat to enter their name into. So what happens in that case is people in the room raise their hands to ask a question, and upon raising their hand, we have a helper, who is often the co-host or one of the other people in the room, give that person a number, and that allows them to lower their hand. And then the host enters how many numbers have been given out into the chat. So that means that the MC can be seeing the names, individual names of people who are on Zoom who have questions. And as far as the people in the room, they can see how many people have been given numbers. And that's enough information for the MC to be calling on people in any order they want to call them on. Once they do that, then the host can put the spotlight on that person or on the in-room camera, the audience node. And that way the person asking the question can be seen on screen. And so the MC decides how many questions to ask, and then decides when the meeting is over, etc. We then take the video which is produced, which the co-host has recorded to their machine, and we do some light editing, such as putting titles on it, taking out long pauses, and other minor fix-ups, and post it to our website. And I would really invite anyone watching this video to go to the website portlandhumanists.org, and on the front page it will have a link to the videos that we've produced, and you can see examples of various combinations where the MC is in the room or the MC is at home, where the speaker is in the room, where the speaker is at home, where the questioners are in the room, where the questioners are at home. Generally speaking, this system works pretty well. There are some downfalls. For example, the people in the room who have questions have to get up and walk over to a microphone if they want to be on the camera. Similarly, in a group discussion type arrangement, it doesn't work. That is, people in the room can't just rapidly go back and forth with comments or questions. It's very orderly the way that they have to request getting into the question queue and then walking up to the microphone and asking the question. So this is definitely not a perfect situation, but it is workable on a shoestring. So we'd be interested in hearing how other people fare with this arrangement, or whether they have improvements or different arrangements of their own. Thank you.